Sometimes questions on an internet get asked and then they make you think. And that thinking can then be turned into something like this because discussion is always fun. Well, when it's done in a civil manner, obviously. On Twitter, yesterday, The Race posed a fun question. Who is the best driver with 10 or fewer Grand Prix wins? And that's an interesting question to ask, because not only are there drivers who have won fewer than 10 knocking about on the grid now, there are those who came before that didn't reach 10 over quite a long career. Now there is the obvious thing of drivers having much longer careers compared to the 1960s and 1970s. Death is now something that happens when everything goes wrong all in one go, and while the chances aren't zero, they've been reduced to minimal. And that's good enough, because you can only do so much before you start removing the things that made Formula 1 and motorsport as a whole what it was in the first place. There's probably a better way of describing that, but I think you know where I'm going with it. There's also the fact that drivers get more races per season these days, and the grids are a bit more competitive these days. In the 90s, as I've shown hundreds of times by now with qualifying times and showing the grids for certain races, with one of the more recent ones being the Australian Grand Prix of 1994 for the Delatraz video, the grids could be spread by over, 5 to 7 seconds, depending on what was going on. In 1996, the FIA stepped in by implementing the 107% rule, designed to stop drivers just simply buying their way onto the grid. Well, I mean, they still could in 1996 and onwards, but now they have to at least have a modicum of pace to be able to get onto the grid. Someone like, Pedro Diniz, for instance. He was most definitely a pay driver, but he always qualified for races. Okay, Melbourne 1997 exists, but Villeneuve's time was so damn quick, they let Diniz start because his practice times were competitive enough. But Pedro Diniz never won a race, so he won't be mentioned anymore in this video. Back in the 1960s, there were only, 9 races or so, which seems mental compared to the 24 that we have in 2025. Things have definitely expanded over the last 60 years or so, so not only were the drivers doing fewer races a season, it meant that over a 10-year career, that is if they ever got that far, as morbid as that sounds, they do fewer races in general anyway. Jackie Stewart, for instance, retired on 100 events entered. Now there are some asterisks to consider here because number 1, Jackie never made that 100th start. He retired from the sport immediately following the death of Francois Sever at Watkins Glen in 1973. Jackie had already won the title and he was going to bow out after 100 races, which would have matched up quite nicely. That US Grand Prix was also the final round of the season, so again, it all added up. But with Sever's death, Stewart withdrew, and he never took that 100th start. In 99 starts between 1965 and 1973, Jackie Stewart amassed a total of 27 Grand Prix victories, which, at the time, was the record, surpassing Jim Clark, who had 24 or 25, I can't remember off the top of my head. Probably should have double checked that before doing this bit, but either way, by comparison, Lewis Hamilton, who now has the record, has almost quadrupled that tally. So while we're here, let's look at the people that we're not going to consider, simply because they have more than 10 Grand Prix victories. So that's Hamilton, Schumacher, Verstappen, Prost, Senna, Alonso, Raikkonen, Hakkinen, anybody that's got over 10 Grand Prix victories, because that is something else entirely. And the greatest of all time debate will never be settled. Some say it's Clark, I'm one of them. Some will say Senna, some will say Schumacher, some will say Hamilton, some will say Verstappen. There's too many factors to consider. So we'll head down the other end. Here is the list of every Formula 1 driver with 10 race wins or fewer, excluding those who won the Indy 500 when it was a round of the Formula 1 World Championship. This is more for reference than filler because you might learn something here. So you've got James Hunt, Ronnie Peterson, Jody Scheckter, Gerhard Berger and Valtteri Bottas on 10 Grand Prix victories. Mark Webber and Lando Norris have 9, while Jacky Ickx, Denny Hulme, Daniel Ricciardo, Charles Leclerc and Oscar Piastri have 8. Rene Arnoux and Juan Pablo Montoya are on 7, with Tony Brooks, John Surtees, Jochen Rindt, Gilles Villeneuve, Jacques Lafitte, Riccardo Patrese, Ralf Schumacher and Sergio Perez all on 6. Farina, Regazzoni, Watson, Alboreto and Rosberg have got 5, that's Keke Rosberg not Nico, with Gurney, McLaren, Irvine, Sainz and Russell on 4. Hawthorne, Collins, Phil Hill, Pironi, Frentzen and Herbert have 3, Gonzalez, Trintignant, Von Trips, Rodriguez, Siffert, Revson, Depailler, Jabouille, Tombe and De Angelis have 2, and then Fagioli, Musso, Bonnier, Baghetti, Bandini, Ginther, Scarfiotti, Gethin, Sever, Beltoise, Pache, Mas, Brambilla, Nilsson, Nannini, Alesi, Panis, Trulli, Kubica, Kovalainen, Maldonado, Gasly and Ocon on just 1 Grand Prix victory. That's a lot of drivers. 115 in total have won at least 1 race. So out of all those people I just listed, which one is the best? Well, I guess it depends on what your metric is, because out of those drivers I've just listed, 10 of them have got a World Championship. The ones with the least amount of wins are Hawthorn and Hill, the former winning his title in 1958, being the first British driver to do so when the Italian dominance in Formula 1 was ending, and the latter in 1961. When the American Phil Hill won the title after the death of Wolfgang von Trips, who was killed at Monza that year. That's a pitiful amount of wins by today's standards, considering that Hamilton had 9 when he won his first title, Jacques Villeneuve had 11 and Schumacher had 10. Piastri and Norris will be into double digits by the end of the season as well when either one of those two wins the championship. But both Hawthorn and Hill were pretty versatile drivers, driving in sports cars as well as Formula 1 cars. Hawthorn won the 1955 24 Hours of Le Mans, a race overshadowed by the absolutely horrendous accident that killed 81 spectators as well as driver Pierre Lever. Hill, as well, won Le Mans, but he would win 3 times, in 1958, 1961, the year he won the F1 Championship, and 1962. So does that make him the only person to win the Formula 1 Championship and Le Mans in the same year? I think it does. No, really, it actually does. There's your pub trivia for today. But those are drivers from the past. The ones that were getting brought up in the race's original tweet were the likes of Leclerc and Ricciardo. Way more recent drivers, with Ricciardo doing his last season last year and Leclerc still on the grid at the time of writing. And there's going to be a few reasons behind this. Recency bias is one, because those 2 drivers are or were in Formula 1 in the last 18 months or so everything is fresh in the memory. Another reason is that the people saying Ricciardo or Leclerc might not be aware of those who came before, because they're too new to things so haven't had time to learn about the drivers of the past. Or it could just be straight up fanboyism, delete as appropriate, but it's more likely to be the first 2. While Ricciardo did have some brilliant seasons, 2020 for Renault and his early Red Bull years, his career was a little more up or down. The big fall off he had in recent years wasn't what many expected. Whether that was down to not getting his head around the ground effect cars that weren't really compatible with the way he wants the car to handle or not is something to consider. And I have done a retrospective on his whole career, so if you want to go and watch that, you can. I just don't think you can put them into the category of best. But then again, it's all opinion, so you can agree and disagree if you want to. But the same names kept cropping up, both on the original tweet and when they posted that same question to Instagram. And those drivers were Keke Rosberg, Gilles Villeneuve, Jacky Ickx, Jochen Rindt, and also John Surtees. But we'll get to Surtees in a bit. Rosberg is quite the anomaly. He won the championship in 1982 with the car that finished 4th in the constructor standings. So what Max Verstappen achieved last year isn't exactly a unique thing. Although it does have to be said that up until 1994, 1982 was probably the most topsy-turvy season on record, as that was the year that Gilles Villeneuve, another contender for the best category, was killed, along with Riccardo Paletti, who was killed at, ironically, the circuit named in Villeneuve's honour. In his career, Keke Rosberg won just 5 races, but when he won the title in 1982, he won 1. Just 1. That also seems crazy by today's standards, and that win came at the 1982 Swiss Grand Prix at Dijon, called that because there was already the French Grand Prix at Paul Ricard. To show you how mental that season was, Rosberg had been disqualified from the Brazilian Grand Prix at Jacarapagua, missed the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola because of the boycott by the FOCA teams in the last battle of the FISA-FOCA war, and then the driver in second, Didier Pironi, missed the final 5 rounds of the season because of his career-ending injuries sustained at Hockenheim. John Watson, who was third, also missed the San Marino Grand Prix and won 2 races, the same number of races as Pironi. But he finished equal with Pironi because his car broke down far too often. See also Prost and Lauda. The championship was won with only 44 points on the board. And while I would say that Rosberg was pretty fast, best? I think there are others. And Rindt is definitely up there. He had actually promised his wife Nina that if he was to win the title in 1970, he would retire from Formula 1. And in a cruel twist of fate, he was killed at the 1970 Italian Grand Prix, and Jacky Ickx in the Ferrari wasn't able to overhaul the points deficit. So Rindt won the championship, posthumously. Rindt was also somebody who dabbled in other forms of racing, and he's on the list of Le Mans winners, winning the race in 1965. But I think he's bettered by 2 others, which, again, is just my opinion. So we have Gilles Villeneuve, one of the most exciting drivers of his generation, along with Ronnie Peterson. In turn, Gilles and Ronnie are up there with Stirling Moss as being the greatest drivers to never win the Formula 1 World Championship, and I probably should cover Moss at some point, because if there was a race to win in the 1950s, chances are he won it. And he was able to hold his own against Fangio and the like back in the day, before his career was ended in 1961. 16 Grand Prix wins Moss has, the most wins without a world title, a record that's been beaten and then handed back to him on more than a couple of occasions. It was done once by Nigel Mansell in 1992, then by Damon Hill in 1996, and a third time by Keke Rosberg in 2016. All within Moss's lifetime as well. But anyway, back to Gilles Villeneuve. His stats would say that he had quite the unremarkable career. Some might go as far as to say, yeah, well, he had a championship winning car in 1979, but Scheckter won the championship despite them both winning 3 races each. And an Autosport forum post from 1999 also said that Scheckter wasn't exactly an all-time great, so how did Villeneuve lose the championship if he's that good? Fair question. In 1979, Gilles wasn't the number 1 driver. Jody was, and Gilles accepted his position and helped Jody get the job done. In 1980, the car was an absolute dog, and it took them a couple of years to get back to the top again. So in 1982, which would be the final year of ground effect, the Ferrari was by far and away the best car on the grid, with 2 drivers vying for the title. The thinking of the time was it was going to be Villeneuve or Pironi, with John Watson picking up the best of the rest honours in his McLaren. But Villeneuve didn't win every race in the early part of 1982, but he was still a threat either way, much like Verstappen has been behind the might of the McLarens this year. But we would never see who was going to win the title out of those 2 drivers, because Villeneuve would be killed at Zolder, while Pironi, who looked certain to win the championship after the death of his teammate, suffered career-ending injuries at Hockenheim. The racing gods also went against Watson, and as we discussed earlier, Rosberg went on to win the championship instead. And John Watson is a really underrated driver, it has to be said. The drivers would end up asking about Villeneuve when they were doing their qualifying laps. They would get their time and they'd go, okay, yeah, but where's Villeneuve? Which shows how much of a benchmark he actually was. But like I said, his statistics will look bad considering how much people rave about him. The best way to compare him is that he was the Ayrton Senna of his era, and he could have raced against Senna if he survived. But when the cars aren't great and there's other factors going against you, the statistics won't tell the full story, as I say hundreds of times in my driver and team retrospective videos. Brundle, for instance, never won a Grand Prix, but look at the teams he drove for over the majority of his career. When he got to Benetton, he had Schumacher as his teammate. When he went to McLaren, the Peugeot engines were rubbish. When you're racing for Brabham, Ligier, Tyrrell and Zaxbyt at the tail end of the 80s, you're lucky to make the grid at all, let alone win a race. And he did all of that after smashing his ankles in. The Brundle video will come, it's just that August is a very slow month for YouTube views, so I don't want to use the good stuff up too early. Someone on the Autosport forums wrote that Villeneuve was like the Gettysburg Address. Reading it is totally fine, but listening to it will hit in a different way. And that's what Villeneuve was. He was something that you had to see to understand, especially in this modern world of statistics being overanalyzed and also twisted to try and prove a point. It's like saying I'm a better guitar player than Alan Prost, so I'm better, but I win by default because Alan Prost doesn't play the guitar. Probably. Damon Hill's pretty good on the guitar though, so is Liam Lawson. And don't get me started on this XG crap that they're doing in football now. Predicted goals per game. Fuck off. So tangents aside, Villeneuve was a emotion rather than a statistical choice. But for me, there really is only one driver I can pick. Jacky Ickx. Although admittedly there is somebody else that could be in this video too, and the other person that you're probably shouting at your screens right now is too unique to include. If you don't know who that is, it's John Surtees, the only man to win the World Championship on 2 and 4 wheels. Now, I'm not forgetting or ignoring Surtees at all, it's that his career is so unique, he's somebody else altogether, and he's not being mentioned for that reason. It goes above everything else, and should be covered in full elsewhere. And it's actually interesting because Ickx also started on bikes, doing 50cc motocross stuff before he went into touring cars and then onto single-seaters. And looking at his career, if it was on four wheels, he was involved, because in 1966, Ickx was in the British Saloon Car Championship, now the British Touring Car Championship, driving for Lotus in Class C, where he was third overall after 4 races entered and a single win in those 4 races. The other 3 entries, all podiums. So there was definitely something there. The following year he was in Formula 2 with Ken Tyrrell's outfit, and he won that championship. By 1968 he was full-time in Formula 1 racing for Ferrari. While the Lotuses were the class of the field, the Ferrari driven by Ickx took his first win at the French Grand Prix at Rouen, with Surtees in second and Stewart third. But that race is overshadowed by the death of Joe Schlesser, where his Honda that had magnesium sheet panel bodywork crashed and then caught fire, igniting the magnesium panels and causing a raging inferno that couldn't be put out until it burned itself out. 69 proved a little better, finishing second to Jackie Stewart and taking 2 wins, with every race he finished being in the points. Then there's the already mentioned 1970 season where he couldn't overhaul Rindt's lead and finished second there too. And in a video I did a couple of years ago about F1's nearly men, things fell off because the Ferrari proved to be unreliable, and Lotus maintained their position at the top with cars like the 72. But Ickx found the majority of his success in sports cars, and in 1969 he and Jackie Oliver won Le Mans despite their Ford GT40 starting dead last, because Ickx walked to his car instead of running and made sure that he was fully secured before setting off. By the end of that opening lap, a driver was dead, and the whole run into the car thing was abandoned from then on. He also did a one-off appearance for McLaren at the Nürburgring in 1973, utterly destroying the 2 existing drivers of Peter Revson and Denny Hulme on his way to third. His successes tended to come at tracks where conditions were tough and courage and mental endurance were required and rewarded. He always did well at the Nürburgring, for instance, but by the mid-1970s his Formula 1 career had stalled. By this time, he'd won Le Mans 4 times: 1969, 1975, 1976, and 1977. He then won the Can-Am Series in 1979. He was able to adapt to conditions seemingly at will and became incredibly good in the wet. His composure in challenging situations made him a force to be reckoned with, and his never-give-up attitude made him extract more where others couldn't. He would go on to win Le Mans 6 times, a feat only bettered by Tom Christensen. He did return to Formula 1 later on in the 1970s, but by this time they'd switched to ground effect, something he didn't get along with. As Matt Bishop wrote for Motorsport magazine, other drivers didn't like the ground effect cars either, but still drove them faster. So maybe he'd been in sports cars too long that anything else was now just weird. And yes, he was a bit contrary to the safety movement in Formula 1 when that first came in, but his protest against the Le Mans start in 1969 was a change on his part as a person, and it also changed the way Le Mans did things from then on. He was also part of the push to get Spa back on the calendar when it was upgraded. But it's not just Le Mans and Formula 1, because on top of the Le Mans victories and Formula 1 wins, he also won the Spa 24. He's also won the World Endurance Championship a number of times with different manufacturers, and he's won the Bathurst 1000 and the Dakar Rally. Maybe it's because he was at Ferrari in a brief banter period for the Scuderia, as well as maybe not adapting well to downforce cars, because he was definitely a lot better in sports cars than single-seaters, but I don't know. Maybe I don't need to do just a video on Surtees in addition. I've also got to do a full video on Ickx as well. It does have to be said that there are cases for and against a lot of the drivers that I've either gone in deeper detail on in this video, as well as all the other drivers that I listed towards the start of the video. There's Denny Hulme and Bruce McLaren for a start. One won the title in 1967 with Brabham, while the other was killed at Goodwood in 1970. But it's all personal opinion, and I thought I would look at the question because overall it is interesting. And how many great drivers from history there have been who have won fewer than 10 races, either because of circumstance or simply because of how things were at the time with fewer races a season, and the fatality rates. Because imagine somebody winning just 3 races in their career and also winning a championship. How messed up would that season have to be for that to be achieved? It would have to be just like horrendous reliability or something like that really, wouldn't it? So then, trying to give an answer to the racist question of, who is the best driver to win fewer than 10 Grand Prix? And like I said, Surtees is a very special case who deserves his own video, but I would like to know what you think. If this has indeed been interesting for you and given you food for thought, then do like the video so I know a good job was done. And for more stuff from the channel, get subscribed and also get that bell on so you never miss out on anything else that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the mad lads at Patreon who support me at a more personal level, and if you want to help keep the lights on around here, then there will be a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and any other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. Or there's super thanks for the one and done types of donations, and memberships so you can Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.